Hello, so this is the long-awaited part 2 of my How to Write a Memoir webinar, I suppose you'd call it. And on this occasion, because I focused on my first book for part 1, on this one I'm going to talk about Running the Orient, which was the book that got published last year in August during the pandemic. Not the best time to release a book, but hey, what can you do? Anyway, so I'm going to talk through some points that are hopefully come from my experience writing that book, but are generalizable as well, and hopefully complementary to what I said in the first one. So I shouldn't repeat myself too much, but there might be some overlap. If you haven't seen the first part of this, you may want to go back 7 or 8 videos. You'll find part 1, How to Write a Memoir. Anyway, so Running the Orient was a different book from the first one because I had the experience of having written my first book. I didn't have to go into so much detail about how I got into running or anything, any sort of background stuff like that. I could sort of launch more into the story of this specific adventure, and I felt fairly confident that quite a few people would have read the first book, and if they hadn't, then I didn't really need to go into too much detail about that story because it wasn't so relevant. So it was a bit easier to write, perhaps a bit more focused, less rambling anecdotes of childhood, that sort of thing. And I think it probably took about the same length of time to write, but it actually was a longer book, and I was in full-time employment for most of the time I was writing it. I think I had something like 3 or 4 weeks before I went back to work to start the book, but most of it was written at lunchtimes and evenings and bits of time grabbed here and there. So the book was a slightly harder concept to sell to a publisher. Although my first publisher showed some initial interest when I first mentioned the idea, when I actually got around to starting the book and said, oh, would you be interested, and sent them a pitch document, which I'll go into later, they just weren't that keen. I don't know entirely why. I never really asked the question, which I probably should have, to be honest. I'm sure they would have given me some decent feedback, but it might have something to do with, sorry about the noise from the street, it might have something to do with an unfortunate incident which caused a rather expensive initial print run. Not my fault, but it would have been very difficult for them to make back their money on my first book. And I guess maybe they had a rule of thumb where, you know, if we make this much money on book 1, then we'll happily give Gavin another book. But I don't really have any experience in publishing apart from that first book at this point, so I just thought, well, for whatever reason, they're not keen. And, you know, I was disappointed, but there are plenty of other small publishers out there, so I went for some others. Before I go into how that happened, actually, let me just give you a brief description of what Running the Orient is for anyone who hasn't read it. Running the Orient, as the cover may suggest, is a story of running adventure, following the route of the 1883 Orient Express from Paris to Istanbul. So it was a journey of 2,300 miles. It's about twice the distance that I ran John O'Groats to Land's End. And it was undertaken with my new, well, not that new, but we'd been going out for maybe 2.5 years, 3 years at that point, when we first came up with the idea. My partner Aradna, we decided to take this trip together, and that she would partly support me and partly have her own adventure, and which she certainly did. And we would do this in a camper van, because when we looked at the budget for the idea, it just wasn't going to be feasible to stay in hotels, and so I was never going to persuade Aradna to stay in a tent. So we bought my sister's second-hand Mazda Bongo, and we set about converting it using our limited DIY skills and even more limited experience, which was none, mostly from YouTube videos. So the book does include a fairly lengthy introduction and opening chapters where I go into the background to the project and how we created our home from, our home on wheels, which we named Roxy, after the Roxy Music CD that we played on her when we were driving back down from Edinburgh. So that gave a sort of natural beginning to the book, talking about why we would decide to do something as crazy as run across the whole of Europe. Bearing in mind that I'd only been to France. Of the 8 countries I'd be passing through, I hadn't been to any of them apart from France. So yeah, that was going to be quite extraordinary experience, regardless of the running or anything else that happened. So I knew that I was going to write a book about it. I knew that there'd be plenty to write about. I had no doubt about that. But other than that, I sort of was pretty open as to what would go into the book until I came back. There was no real reason to try and attempt anything fancy with jumping back and forth in time, apart from the odd, anecdote from childhood that was left over from the first book that could be helpful. But for the most part, it's a fairly straight retelling of the adventure from beginning to end, and a chapter at the end for, what happened when we were coming back home. Book's available on Amazon, so if you want to pick up a copy, it's there, and hopefully when the bookshop's open, you might find it in your local bookshop as well. So anyway, to go into what happened next, I got back, I started writing, I got about a quarter of the way in, and I started sending some inquiry emails out to agents. And what I discovered was, because it's a kind of a sports book, I thought, well, maybe I could be clever, and there could be books for sports writers or books for adventure or travel or something like that, that are represented by specific kinds of agents. And I found, in fact, there are some sports book agencies, because you'll have noticed that, every famous footballer, every famous runner, every famous athlete of any, Lewis Hamilton or whoever it is, there will be a book, a supposed autobiography, but in many cases it's ghostwritten or co-written. There's definitely a market for that. They sell hundreds of thousands, possibly even more, depending on who it is. And I just thought I might as well contact some of these agencies. They'll know big publishers, they'll know how to sell those kind of books. I'm not a famous athlete, but this is because it's an extraordinary kind of running adventure. I thought, yeah, you never know. And in fact, I did get, amongst the standard rejections, I got quite a positive, bit of interest from Nick Walters at David Luxton Associates, who is now my agent for nonfiction. And I guess I hadn't really researched much what agents do in terms of selling a nonfiction book that hasn't yet been finished. And I quickly learned that I would be expected to, that he could actually sell the book before I finished it, which was quite surprising. Because I'd written the first book. So, because Downhill From Here existed, proof of the fact that I can finish a book and write something that will be published. So that's the first hurdle that any publisher will want you to jump over. If you haven't finished your book, they need to have the confidence that you will. Having an agent definitely helps with that, because they know that there's someone out there who's going to be chasing you for it. And the other thing is, obviously, they have all the contacts. They know exactly who to contact. They know how things can be sold. And so we worked on a pitch document together, and this is that, quite thick. You can see that my father designed quite a nice logo, which we actually used in the social media and the website when we were engaged on our journey, so that people could follow us. And just nice to have some branding. So it's quite a good hint. If you know someone who's a designer, it definitely helps make your proposal stand out if you have, something a little bit different. So there's an overview, which is kind of just like a one-page summary. Then there's a section on the themes, which I've written here. I'll just give you an example. It says, while the overarching theme of my first book was self-discovery, Running the Orient looks outwards towards beyond the self. There will be a focus on finding identity through the places we call home, whether these are villages, towns, countries or continents. In the 21st century, does Europe mean anything more than a loose affiliation of countries? So one thing the agent was very keen on was that to help it have a universal appeal, it just couldn't just be an autobiography of an unknown person, because those are few and far between. So we worked quite hard on coming up with thematic strands that I could explore throughout the book. So that's definitely something you should be looking into. What is it about? It's not enough just to say, it's about me. It's about what happened to me. No, it's not about that. What is it about? What is it about that experience that other people would want to read? So the third section of this first bit is a chapter structure. Now, David was very keen on this, and I have found it challenging because I tend to fly by the seat of my pants when I'm writing, and I don't tend to do much in the way of structuring. So I had 4 sections laid out, geographical sections, just to break the book up a bit. And actually it broke into 3 sections ultimately, which was Old Europe, New Europe, and no. What's that? Let me check. Oh, Old Europe, New Europe, and the edge of Europe. So France, Germany, and Austria, and possibly Hungary being Old Europe, and then Romania and Bulgaria, because they recently, well, in the 80s, stopped being communist countries, and I think they joined the European Union fairly recently. Then they were New Europe, and then the edge of Europe was mostly about Turkey, because it's both European and Asian in a sense. The next section was I did a sort of breakdown. Again, it's kind of all fiction, to be honest, because I made up chapters and listed roughly what would be covered by each chapter, and really that bears no resemblance to what happened. But the main thing is it looked like I knew exactly what I was going to be writing. And the thing is, I couldn't really know what I was going to write till I wrote it, and this became the only bone of contention between me and my agent was going back and forth, and me going, I don't know what I'm going to write, and him going, well, just make something up, just split it into sections. And okay, so I did it, and he said, look, you're not going to be held to no one's going to hold you to any of this. It's just to give them, the publisher, the confidence that it's going to have structure, it's going to be broken into chapters, it's going to be broken into sections, etc. Photos are important in these documents. It just gives them context, and it, especially if you're talking about a journey or travel narrative, you want to have some indication that the journey is going to be worth going on. In my case, we had a map, so to sort of clarify the scale of the endeavour, and it terrified me when we first created that. And then I talked a little bit about the route and why I chose the Orient Express, and talked about the exciting places that I was going to talk about, the Alps and the Carpathians and so forth. And then I gave some little highlights of the journey. So I've got battling icy blizzards in rural France, tackling the precipitous Austrian Alps, inadvertently becoming an illegal immigrant into Romania, fending off feral dog attacks, etc., etc. Then a section on training, because I wanted to, still make it clear that this is a book about a running adventure, so it has that crossover potential. And again, photographs, always nice pictures. I took all these on my iPhone. I mean, it's amazing really how well they came out. Then there's a little biography section. You'll need to have a little bit just an about me, even if you're just talking about your job and where you grew up and whether you went to university, or what brought you to the point where you decided to write your story. And then a section on Aradhana, because as I'll explain later on, this story is not just about me. The story is about 2 people and a van, and their experiences together, meeting others along the way. So it was important to have a section about her involvement. And then there's Roxy, the van, in, I believe, Turkey. Quite a long section on her, because I had to describe the fact that we didn't just buy a camper van, we made one. And then social media. I think they like this, because I put a sort of little montage together of my some of my best Instagram shots, which I posted during the trip. And they do look pretty damn good. And the fact that we had social media links and things that they could help to sell the book, outlets for updates, and also, you know, a publisher really, really wants to know that you will do everything you can to sell your book. You're not just going to write it, deliver it to them in a sit back. Because the realities of publishing, especially small publishers these days, are they just don't have the budgets to, you know, throw money at every book. So you'll be expected to do quite a lot of your marketing. I wrote a little bit about the film of Downhill From Here just because, actually I don't know why I did that. I guess I thought, you know, I was going to assemble something from I did some GoPro footage from running the Orient, and at that time I think I had a plan to cut together some bits of that. Well, I've looked at it recently and it's not really very good, so that won't happen. Here's a key bit which I think they really liked. This diagram, Venn diagram. It's basically, I mean, I might include a close-up for you, but basically it's 3 kinds of books which fit into the category of sport, travel and memoir. And then I had books that are solely one of those 3, books that would fit into 2 of those categories, and then very, well, I thought cleverly, I put my book in the middle, thus implying that it would sell to people who are into sport, memoir and travel, which hopefully it will, or it has. And then at the back, links, again, to prove my social media credentials. And then there's some video clips from Downhill From Here, just for fun, you know, something else that I've done that they might enjoy. Moody little photograph at the bottom of me sitting, looking out. And then, if you've written more than one book, if you have anyone's written something nice about the book you're trying to sell, include that. So I've got testimonials and a photo of the first book, you know, just to prove it exists. And then, so that's it's quite good. I've got Sean Conway, Geographical Magazine and the Sunday Mail, amongst other things. And then they will want you to include the opening chapter or 2. So I've got the foreword, which is actually spelt forward because I think I'm clever. And the section at the back is not called the afterword, it's called the backwards. I know. Yeah. So, yeah, so there's about 20 pages of text at the back. Oh, and then I just ended it with another photo. So that was the document, and it works out as 25 pages, so that's quite generous. But bear in mind that about 15 of those are the opening chapters. So once we'd worked on about 7 or 8 iterations of that to get it right, and then Nick felt he could now send it out to some to some publishers. And he did get some interest. He got some rejections for that, were disappointing, but eventually got some interest from Great Northern Books, who are a mostly Leeds, I think, based publisher. They do a lot of, they do some sports books, like they do stuff about cricket and local county cricket. It's very popular. They've published biographies of some local sporting heroes. They do all sorts of things. They're not quite as eclectic as Sandstone, because they don't do fiction, but they do many other types of book, and they saw this as, I guess, a chance to branch out a little bit. They did have a book by a guy called Otto Eckroyd, I think, who cycled across America or something. So it wasn't an entirely unknown project, and I guess they thought they could sort of cross-sell. I don't know, cross-sell? They'll basically sell those 2 books together as a package almost. So anyway, they were keen. I met with another David Burrell, and we had a good chat about music and books and everything. Got on very well, and I just thought, yeah, these are the guys to go for. And yeah, we worked with them. They were quite light editors, I think maybe even lighter than Sandstone were, but that's not to say that I just delivered a manuscript and they published it. No. We did go through some toing and froing, but they were very easy to work with, and they produced a great looking book. You know, I really wanted it to have the same quality as the first book, so it's got maps, it's got photographs. It's actually got, they agreed to do 2 sections of photographs, so yeah. Again, take lots of pictures. If you're having an adventure, or if whatever your memoir is, use photographs. It really helps to sell the thing and to sell the finished book. So anyway, let me just check this is still recording. Yes. My nightmare is it runs out halfway through, which is like, oh God, I'll do it again. So you need to answer some key questions when you're planning a memoir. I won't go through the stuff that I mentioned in the first one. So even with the second or third book, the questions are always the same. First one is, what is the hook? What is like the one sentence pitch that you would give? What's the elevator pitch? And I would say this is a book about ordinary middle-aged bloke who decides to run across Europe from Paris to Istanbul, following the route of the Orient Express, with his partner in a self-built camper van. And that was unusual enough to sort of, you know, prick up the ears of most publishers or interested parties. Who are the audience? So, you know, as I described, I did that Venn diagram very deliberately to say it's quite a wide audience. You know, it's travel, it's memoir, and it's running. And third question is, what is the tone and style? Is it going to be a heartfelt, soul-searching narrative? I can't really write those. Everything I write has got a bit of comedy to it. I just can't help but see the funny side even of near-death experiences or dog attacks in this case. I think I had something like 12 dog attacks in one day with 19 dogs in Romania. Yeah. So yeah, there's... he was going to have a sort of... almost like a Cervantes sort of Don Quixote tilting at windmills thing to it. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of me blundering around in the wilderness, trying to find direction, literally and metaphorically. Fourth question is, what do you bring to the story? Why you? This may seem a very strange question. Since you're writing a memoir, you can't really be writing an autobiography about someone else. But there are, you know, no matter, unless it's the weirdest experience anyone's ever had, like giraffe smuggling in Malawi or something, there are probably quite a few other people who've had a sort of tangentially similar experience and could be writing autobiographies. I mean, I remember when I wrote Downhill From Here, my friend Chris Thrall was thinking about writing his book. And, you know, he ran from John O'Groats to Land's End a couple of years later and wrote a book about it. So, and Sean Conway's book about that very thing is up there. So, although mine came out first, there may be other people writing a similar narrative. So why are you the one who should be telling the story? As long as you can say, well, bring something different to it. I have a different approach. This is my unique story, you know, etc., etc. Put all that in the proposal. So I've looked through the proposal with you, and yeah, you will be expected to put something like that together, most likely. Now, as I said whilst going through the proposal, whatever media you have, your social media feeds, your photographs, any video, any sound notes, any paper notes, anything that you have as evidence, keep it very carefully curated so that you can go back to it when you're writing your autobiography or memoir, because you will find it's surprising what you can remember and surprising what you can forget. And it's awful having to do detective work to figure out where you were or what year something happened or who you talked to, or trying to reconstruct dialogue because you didn't think to write down that amazing phrase that somebody said. And obviously you can do research. You can go and interview your friends and family who were involved in the story, and you should do. But just make sure that you have somewhere in a box or a drawer all the stuff you need to construct your story. And social media, just make sure, even in the process of writing, it's good to tell if you have, followers and fans from any other stuff you've done. Keep them abreast of the progress you're making. Don't bore them with too many updates, but just keep it trickling along so that people know that you've got another book coming out. Yes. Oh, yeah. A good way to structure it, or a good way to start thinking about structure, is you really want to sort of shape it around the highlights of the story, of the journey. And the highlights doesn't mean positive things necessarily. It means what, the newspaper expression, if it bleeds, it leads. You want the stories of when you were bleeding, metaphorically or physically, emotionally. You want the powerful events that changed you, shaped your life, to be the things that you pin the story on. They can give you the structure. You want to have something near the end of the book that is a dramatic, a crisis point, or a discovery, or an epiphany, something that changed. You want something near the beginning that's, in screenwriter terms, is the inciting incident. What is it that set you off on this particular life journey or episode of your life? What is it that defined the starting point? Identify those and you'll already have the beginnings of a structure. Think about, what are your unique insights? What things can you say? Again, this comes back to why you're writing the story, but what do you want to say that you don't think anyone else will have said on the subject? I had 3 new aspects to this book that weren't really a part of the first book. The first one was I was in a relationship, and that a partner, Aradna, was going to come with me. So that was a big deal. And she helped me, obviously, put the whole thing. She came up with the idea. It was her that had the bright idea to run across Europe. So that became, a vital part of the story. I actually had a bit of criticism from somebody recently on Twitter or something who said, oh, no, it was a review. Was it a review? I can't remember. Somebody basically said, oh, it would have been nice if every other chapter was written by Aradna. And I thought, well, that would have been a book. It was not the book I was going to write, but that would have been a different book. I don't really understand the criticism of, like, why didn't you write a totally different book? Because I didn't. There's no real answer to it. There'll always be somebody out there who just wishes you had written a different book. They probably wish they'd bought a different book, to be honest. That's fine. You can't please everyone. So the relationship was vital in part of the story. The fact that the DIY a camper van van life is huge. We didn't really deliberately, in fact, we didn't even know this until we started renovating a camper van, that there even was a concept of van life. We just thought there were traditional traveling people and people too poor that had to live in their car. We didn't realize it was a lifestyle choice with, like, beautifully curated Instagram feeds. And all the men have sort of designer beards, and they're always wearing, like, tight jeans, and they always have, like, lumberjack shirts on and laptops, and the girls are always beautiful with sort of like honey blonde hair, and they're always doing yoga on the roof at sunrise. That was not us. Although I'm wearing not a plaid shirt, but faux tartan of some design. Anyway, I've lost the thread there, haven't I? Oh yes, Roxy was another key part of the story. And finally, Europe, the concept of us being part of Europe. Brexit was, when we were writing it, Brexit hadn't happened, and Brexit had happened. Had it? When the book came out? Yeah, I think it had just happened when the book came out. So, but no, Brexit had happened, but we were still most of the conditions under which we lived were shared with the European Union. So the transition period was still underway. But we were kind of against Brexit. We sort of wanted to demonstrate our solidarity for Europe, and that we feel like Europeans, and that Britain is clearly part of Europe. You know, geographically, it's not America. It's part of the continent of Europe. It's clearly a chip off the old block, literally. Anyway, and then another theme is a relationship under stress, because if you live in a camper van for 5 months with someone, it really will test your relationship. I've got a note here, what is your thesis? And that might be putting it a little bit too academically, but as well as the theme, you really want to have a sort of something to say. You know, what are you saying? If somebody were to say, well, what are you saying to the reader in this book? Are you just describing a bunch of events that happened? Or are you actually, do you have a point? And I guess my thesis in running the Orient is something like, we're all capable of much more than we could possibly have imagined. And we share a lot more than we think we do with people that may seem initially quite different. So that's really 2 theses, but that's fine. You can have 2. A key thing to remember, which I think I've already mentioned, possibly in the other video as well, is that it's not all about you. And especially in this case, when I have my partner with me and Roxy and the people we met. So what makes the book come alive is the dialogue, the meetings, the conflict, the interpersonal conflict, and the surprising moments of connection. And in a travel narrative, it's absolutely key. You're not just describing landscape, you're describing places where people live and the ways in which they live and how you interact. I mean, you had some amazing stories in the book about being invited to a campfire by Austrian farmers, and at one point the van, Aradna left the lights on and the battery drained, and a random German bloke gave us a jump start, but then later on he came and he brought us oatcakes and beer and gas, because we'd run out of camping gas. And all these little stories about people from different backgrounds and speaking different languages and not knowing anything about us, I think that added to the flavour of the book and made it more universal and made it more comic at times as well. So hopefully you've got a whole bunch of physical media to bring to bear, as I said, photographs, notes that you've taken. It's good. It's quite nice in certain types of memoir to have extra features. And I think what's proven quite popular with runners is I've got all these tips spread throughout the book, because I thought I've had 2 long distance running adventures now, and I've picked up a few things along the way. So I've got here's one, tips for multi-day runners, and the first one is about planning. And then I've got there's basically one every 2 or 3 chapters. Things like blisters and chafing, hydration, nutrition, safety, social media, fatigue. The sort of things that will appear mostly to people who are doing to long distance running or long distance hiking. But they're only 1 page or 2 pages at most, so they don't really add too much to the running total, but they add quite a lot of value. And then, as well as the photographs, at the end of the book I've got kit lists. So I've got a list of the stuff that I carried with me on my person. I've got a list of the kit in Roxy, and I've got a daily nutrition, so I've got an example of what I would eat in a day, how I get my something like 5,000 to 6,000 calories. And then I've got, like in the first book, I ended with a funny little ditty, because when I was in Romania rather, in the Carpathians, there's about 6,000 brown bears, and the advice they always give you is don't sneak up on them. You know, if you're coming around a twisty corner around a road or something, or a trail, if you make noise like sing or shout or something, speak at volume, they'll hear you coming and they'll, you know, I wouldn't say scuttle, they'll lollop away. So I invented this bizarre little song, Please Don't Eat Me, Mr. Bear. So that's in at the end. Yeah, and endings. The key thing is to know when to stop, and I'll have to bear that in mind myself because this video is getting rather long. You need a point at which to exit the tale. Now, my tale, I had a dilemma because I don't want to spoil the book for anyone who's not read it, but that I did have a very obvious dramatic ending, which I deliberately built to by sort of seeding it earlier through the text. This is a key technique. You can do that in memoir. It's absolutely fine to sort of trail things that may happen in the future. You're talking from an omnipotent point of view of having got to the end of this part of your life. So it's okay to be looking back or looking forwards. That's a thing that a lot of people just sort of miss out on. They just tell a narrative, straight through. But you can jump back and forth in terms of memory and flash forwarding. It's just probably not a great idea to have the chapters completely out of order, unless that's part of the theme of the book, I suppose. So I knew where to stop the book, but there were some things that happened afterwards which would have kind of undercut that dramatic ending. And so I decided, no, I'm going to end the book with how I felt at a particular time, and the hindsight of like 18 months since ending that adventure, that can go in another book. That's a tale for another day. So I want to end here, go out on a high, and then the last chapter, the afterword, I think it's called Backwards, is a nice little bit about we had a bit of a holiday. We took 5 weeks and we drove, well, initially quite slowly, but then quite fast, back to Calais via some countries we hadn't ever thought we'd visit, like Bosnia and Montenegro and Croatia, places like that. So that's in the book, just as a kind of wind down, like the end of a running. When you're running around a track, you do the track session, and then you have a little wind down where you just walk or jog very slowly, just to sort of let the body cool down without completely coming to a dead stop. That's one technique. It depends. You might have the kind of narrative where you do want to end with a really dramatic punch, and then almost like a cliffhanger. So those are my words of wisdom about running the Orient, and also about memoir writing, particularly if you're writing a sequel or a second memoir. So the book is Running the Orient, and I fully expect all of you to buy a copy if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed this video, do share it and subscribe to my channel. I'll try and do a few more how-tos on various other things that are in the pipeline, or other aspects of my creativity perhaps. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you again very soon with a short story, no doubt. Bye-bye.